Le Sénégal, sous mon magistère, sera un pays d'espérance, un pays apaisé, avec une justice indépendante et une démocratie renforcée. Telle est ma promesse sur la foi du serment que je viens de prêter devant Dieu et devant la nation en votre présence.
Senegal's young president has become a nightmare for the Western world within no time. Soon after taking charge of the country, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, the new Senegal president, revealed his radical plans. Instead of going with the Western camp and trying to appease the Western masters, he boldly said that he would not only keep Senegal away from the West, but also kick out France, the former colonial power. This has proved to be an upset for France and the Western world as a whole, because they have always planned to use democracy to project power and influence. Democratic leaders are more prone to be influenced because they need Western help to rule successfully. However, that's not the case with the new Senegal president because he has his people behind him, giving him absolute authority. And what does his people want? Well, they want a Senegal free from France, so they are standing with the president. But how will Diomaye Faye free his country from France? Executing some radical plans that might hurt the West. Let's find that out in this video. The reason why Diomaye Faye has vowed to make France leave Senegal forever is that he has himself suffered from the cruelties. He knows the only way the people of Senegal can grow independent is by freeing them from France and the invisible reins with which France controls Senegal. Just 10 days before securing victory in the Senegalese presidential election, Bassirou Diomaye Faye was in jail. Now, Faye's win has infused the populace with optimism, especially among the younger generation, who are vitalized by his promise of sweeping change. Faye's political party, the Patriots of Senegal, is famous for being anti-establishment. A former tax inspector, Faye positioned himself as a pan-Africanist leader, committed to steering Senegal toward economic self-reliance, moving away from vestiges of French colonialism like the West African CFA franc, a currency tied to the euro. He pledged to overhaul the government, combat corruption, and promote transparency. At 44, Faye is viewed by Senegal's youth as a relatable figure whose values are grounded in a traditional village upbringing and a dedication to Islam. His primary rival, Amadou Ba of the ruling coalition, conceded defeat after failing to persuade voters with promises of maintaining the status quo. It marked the first time since Senegal's independence from France in 1960 that an opposition candidate emerged victorious in the initial round of a presidential election. You should know that Faye was not the original choice for his party's presidential candidate. He stepped in for former contender Sonko, who was barred from running due to a defamation conviction. But Sonko has also been brought back, which you will know more about in a moment. Sonko had fascinated Senegal's youth with his pointed criticisms of political elites and gained a martyr-like status for serving jail time on various charges.
Exprime un profond désir de changement systémique. À travers mon élection, le peuple sénégalais s'est engagé dans la voie de la construction d'un Sénégal juste, d'un Sénégal prospère, dans une Afrique en progrès.
But what genius has Faye done to kick France out? Well, he has appointed that man as his prime minister, who is known for being an anti-French establishment working in Senegal. His name is Sonko, and who has been exposing ministers engaged in corruption and speaking boldly about the French control in Senegal. For that reason, he was barred from running elections. However, the new Senegal president knew him and knew that by appointing him as prime minister, he could allow him to free Senegal from France.
It is high time for France to lift its knee off our neck and put an end to this unjust oppression. Centuries of misery, human trafficking, colonization, and neocolonization have caused immeasurable suffering. It's time to put an end to this cycle of oppression. It's high time for France to leave us alone. It's time for France to take a cue from its European neighbors and learn a valuable lesson in independence. Germany is the leading economic power in Europe, significantly surpassing France, which is ranked as the third or fourth largest economic power globally. Germany does not exploit any country, any colony, I can mention Italy, I can mention Spain, who had colonies before, but who do not exploit anyone, who do not interfere, who do not impose leaders in their former colonies.
Whenever Ousmane Sonko spoke, he roasted France, and for that reason, he always faced difficulties. But now, he has been picked by Faye, who also endured prison himself and plans to kick out France. Sonko has been charged with leading the fight against France's influence, ensuring that no French influence remains in the country. And he perfectly knows how to do it by embarrassing France openly.
On what grounds does France believe it can continue to impose leaders on us and make choices on our behalf? This must come to an end. And the emerging Africa, the African youth, the African elites, and the African diaspora all stand united in saying no, it cannot continue any longer. France's hypocrisy is evident and pervasive in daily life. Let's examine the cases of Mali and Chad as prime examples of this hypocrisy. In Chad, where the constitutional process has been interrupted, France applauded and its president visited to officially consecrate the new king's coronation ceremony. In Mali, where it is not the constitutional process that has been interrupted, but the transition process, France has condemned and even packed up its things to say that it is leaving Mali. That's hypocrisy. It's the double standard. It is the double language that France employs in its dealings with Africa.
But how is France closely watching and planning? Bassirou Diomaye Faye ran elections advocating for rupture, pushing for increased sovereignty for Senegal, which included withdrawing from the CFA West African franc currency union established by France almost a century ago. His unexpected victory in the presidential election has prompted close scrutiny in Paris, sparking questions about the impact on France's ties with its former West African colony. Observers are questioning whether Faye's presidency will escalate anti-French sentiment or strengthen the influence of other foreign powers. Concerns also linger about whether it will hasten the decline of France's economic and military presence in West Africa, especially since Paris has already withdrawn troops from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Critics argue that Faye's election highlights the necessity of reassessing and reshaping France's relationships with its former colonies, a process some believe is already in motion. According to France's influential Le Monde newspaper, Faye's win acts as a wake-up call for Western nations like France, which are now facing competition from multiple global powers. Initial responses from both Paris and Dakar were positive, with French President Emmanuel Macron warmly congratulating Faye and expressing a desire to bolster bilateral ties. But that was the surface-level reality, as Faye's win and radical policies were already unsettling France. Faye, while reaffirming Senegal's commitment to its alliance with France, stresses the importance of revisiting and strengthening the partnership for mutual gain. The long-standing relationship between France and Senegal has been deep, spanning various aspects such as culture, education, and economics. Nevertheless, there is a growing tide of anti-French sentiment in Francophone Africa, particularly among the younger generation, who often chant slogans demanding the removal of French forces. And interestingly, Faye is from that younger generation who knows the only solution to their country's true independence is moving away from France. Faye's ally in the opposition, Ousmane Sonko, has been critical of what he perceives as France's disproportionate influence in Senegal. Both Faye and Sonko advocate for increased national sovereignty over resources like oil and fisheries. But what more old tie is Faye planning to break? Well, Faye and Sonko's pre-election campaign focused mainly on one thing: sovereignty. Therefore, Senegal will keep relations with only countries that respect its sovereignty. However, if any country tried teaching Senegal anything while being under the illusion that Senegal would be manipulated, ties would immediately end. Not only that, but the system of exploitation like the CFA franc will end by introducing a new national currency, fostering mutually beneficial international partnerships, and revising unequal natural resource contracts. Of particular importance is the economic dimension of Senegal's foreign relations. The ruling coalition advocates for left-wing Pan-Africanist policies, stressing national control and management of resources. In line with this, Faye announced an audit of the oil, gas, and mining sectors, hinting at the potential renegotiation of contracts deemed unfavorable to Senegal's populace. This move addresses public concerns about certain contracts not serving the country's best interests and potentially disadvantaging ordinary citizens. Consequently, external partners and investors should expect Senegal to assert its economic interests with a degree of nationalism in its dealings. However, it's probable that Senegal will adopt a more cautious stance regarding the future of the CFA franc and its membership in the West African Economic and Monetary Union. But that does not mean that's the only plan. Faye and Sonko know that if they execute radical monetary policies, Senegal's enemies and those who want the country to decline will instantly use their current influence. They will try to bankrupt Senegal. Therefore, the best way will be to gradually put in place the mechanism to introduce a new currency. Senegal's currency, which is shared by 7 other WEMU members, is tied to the euro, with monetary policy managed by the Dakar-based central bank, BCEAO. Faye and Sonko had advocated for reducing France's influence over the BCEAO and replacing the CFA franc with a currency more beneficial to local economies. Sonko clarified his stance in a pre-election press briefing, suggesting that introducing a new currency would only happen if reforms to the CFA franc at the sub-regional level failed. By appointing Abdourahmane Sarr, an economist known for his reformist views on the currency, as the Minister of Economy, Planning and Cooperation, Sonko signals a commitment to pursuing reform. But is it true that Faye will join Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré, Mali's Assimi Goïta, and Niger's Abdourahmane Chiani? Well, Sonko previously voiced support for Mali's interim leader, Assimi Goïta, aligning with Senegal's new leadership's Pan-Africanist and sovereignist ideals similar to those of their Sahelian counterparts. However, Senegal's successful election underscores its status as a robust democracy, making an alliance with military-led nations unlikely. But that does not mean that's what would happen. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Senegal are countries whose leadership have similar feelings of making their countries powerful and independent. Therefore, it's more likely that Faye will join the juntas. The 3 Sahelian states received invitations to Faye's inauguration, demonstrating the president's commitment to maintaining friendly relations while working on ECOWAS reforms, potentially paving the way for their return. These engagements do not indicate Senegal will replicate the alliance of Sahelian states' close ties with entities such as Russia or discontinue security cooperation with existing partners. Yet, nothing is certain. Senegal will likely maintain a pragmatic approach by sustaining relations with traditional partners, expanding current connections, and forging new alliances, all while considering the anti-imperialist and pan-Africanist sentiments prevalent among its predominantly youthful population. In Senegal's emerging government, key officials are pushing for reforms aimed at gaining more control over the country's resources, with a specific aim of reducing its long-standing dependence on foreign powers, notably France. Concerns about the rising foreign currency debt resulting from previous administrations. Infrastructure projects are being highlighted by the newly appointed finance minister, Abdourahmane Sarr. Senegal is emphasizing its determination to strengthen both bilateral and multilateral partnerships while striving for more autonomy in its public policy decisions. With government debt standing at 72% of gross domestic product, exceeding the sub-Saharan African average of 56%, Senegal aims to exert greater control over its financial policies, including seeking autonomy for the central bank overseeing the West African Economic and Monetary Union. Additionally, the government plans to review existing contracts, particularly in the energy, oil, and mining sectors, to ensure they are in line with the public interest, as stated by the newly appointed minister, Birame Souleye Diop. However, the outcome of any renegotiation will depend on the findings of an audit initiated by Faye immediately after his inauguration. But what economic reforms have made France nervous? Keeping its former colonies dependent financially has been French policy to control African nations, and Faye plans to make Senegal's economy independent of France. Therefore, he issued a directive, commanding his prime minister to make an urgent action plan aimed at reviving the nation's struggling economy and finances. During Faye's inaugural cabinet meeting, he delegated the task of devising an action plan by month's end to his prime minister and former mentor, Ousmane Sonko. The plan is anticipated to enclose a thorough review of current programs and initiatives, alongside an evaluation of the overall state of public finances, international partnerships, and collaborations with the private sector. Because the action plan will be made while keeping the people of Senegal in view, it will be recommended that all policies that have been followed for years be re-evaluated. Whether it is about CFA franc, oil and gas contracts, French-held businesses involved in monopolizing, and more, immediate actions will be taken to relieve the people of Senegal who have been paying the price for years. Faye stressed the imperative of promptly finalizing and executing the plan, particularly emphasizing the necessity for a daring strategy to jumpstart the national economy in tandem with the Senegalese private sector. He reiterated his mandate to lead a substantial departure and transformation across all facets of the country's economy and society. Faye knows that Senegal has sufficient natural resources to finance its growth and become one of the leading economies in Africa. Therefore, immediately after taking the oath, Faye unveiled plans for Senegal to conduct a comprehensive audit of its oil, gas, and mining sectors. This initiative aligns with his administration's pledge to ensure transparency and accountability in managing the country's natural resources. President Faye reiterated his commitment to revealing the true ownership of extractive companies and conducting a rigorous examination of these vital sectors. While offering assurances to investors regarding their favorable reception in Senegal, Faye underscored that their rights would be protected alongside the state's and its citizens' interests. Senegal's maiden offshore oil endeavor, the Sangomar oil and gas project operated by Woodside Energy, is ready to start in mid-2024, heralding a significant milestone in the nation's energy sector. But how does Faye plan to deal with some officials who are accustomed to being used by France in return for money? To deal with them, Faye has revealed a comprehensive anti-corruption program under which those involved in corruption will be purged.
I will govern with humility and with transparency. I will work to get rid of corruption in all sectors and will work toward rebuilding our institutions.
President Faye knows France's historical practice of using bribery and gifts to influence officials that act as barriers to the country's aspirations for progress and growth. But the bribe is not offered directly by the French government, rather by private French companies. By tempting officials, France not only undermines Senegal's independence, but also obstructs efforts to implement meaningful reforms. Faye understands that allowing French influence to infiltrate Senegal's leadership can hinder development and perpetuate a system prioritizing external interests over those of the Senegalese people. The threat posed by French bribery and gifts is complex. Firstly, it promotes dependence among Senegalese officials, potentially compromising their allegiance to national interests for personal gain. This compromises their ability to act in Senegal's best interests, as their decisions may be influenced by external pressures rather than genuine concern for the welfare of the country and its citizens. Moreover, French interference through bribery and gifts undermines Senegal's efforts to enact reforms and address systemic issues like corruption and inefficiency. By co-opting key decision-makers, France can obstruct attempts to implement significant changes that may threaten its own interests or disrupt existing power dynamics. This perpetuates a cycle of inertia, impeding Senegal's progress toward greater transparency, accountability, and effective governance. President Faye's introduction of measures to root out corrupt officials represents a determined response to the threat of French influence, demonstrating his commitment to combating corruption and safeguarding Senegal's autonomy. By purging individuals engaged in corrupt practices, Faye aims to strengthen the integrity of Senegal's institutions and shield them from external manipulation. This proactive approach not only enhances Senegal's resilience against foreign interference, but also sends a clear message that corrupt behavior will not be tolerated within the government. Faye knows that by exploiting vulnerabilities within institutions and bribing officials, foreign actors perpetuate a cycle of dependency and underdevelopment. This underscores the urgent need for robust anti-corruption measures and mechanisms to safeguard national sovereignty and foster inclusive and sustainable development. Purges will directly remove officials involved in corruption, allowing Faye to consolidate power and give an open message that those loyal to foreign governments will not be allowed to stay in power. So, How has President Faye closed all doors for France? Well, President Faye's strategic actions in Senegal represent significant progress in affirming the nation's sovereignty and reducing French influence. Through initiatives like gradually replacing the CFA franc, renegotiating oil and gas contracts, and cracking down on corruption, Faye underscores Senegal's commitment to its own interests and rallying broad support from its citizens. These measures effectively counteract French interference and reinforce Senegal's autonomy on the world stage. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. What do you think? Will Diomaye Faye be able to free his country from France? Do you believe France will allow Senegal to get away, given that France is notorious for never leaving its former colonies? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on whether Faye should align his country with Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali to build a stronger African bloc. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.